This episode of the Paddock Pass podcast is brought to you by Renthal Street Components. Over 800 street fitments for handlebars, bar mounts, clip-ons, brake pads, chains, and sprockets.
This is the Paddock Pass podcast coming to you from David Emmett's German barn. A decent 20 minutes from Sachsenring and fresh after the latest red haze to have hit the sport for round 7 of the series. Before we launch into our mini Panzerfaust of a busy, sunny and invigorating Licky Molly Motorrad Grand Prix Deutschland, this is a swift reminder to check out renthal.com for any fitments or accessories you might need for your road bike. Thanks to our friends Jensen, you know that the Renthal have pretty much the key essential parts for upgrading your handling experience on the tarmac. Thanks, guys. This is also our second show with the backing of Husqvarna Motorcycles. I know the people behind the brand would much rather we talk about Ayumu Sasaki's fantastic speed in Moto 3 rather than their bitter misfortune in Moto 2, where Darren Binder was punted out of the running on his Licky Molly Intact GP machine once again on the first corner. We know Sam Lowes was not too happy about the dwindling track time for Moto 2 this year, but the South African must have a total race time of less than 20 seconds in 2 weekends through no fault of his own. Jeremy Alcoba, hang your head in shame. Speaking of Ayumu Sasaki, lovely guy. We spoke with him exclusively on this show, and that interview is coming up a bit later. As for Husqvarna, Svartpilen and Vitpilen models, pronunciation any good, Dave?
Svartpilen and Vitpilen.
Thank you for the correction. 3 different...
I mean, I don't even know. That's just what I think Swedish should sound like.
It sounds impressive anyway. 3 different cylinder sizes are impossible to miss or ignore. I've ridden the Svartpilen 125 and attempted some dirt tracking on the 401. Excellent bikes. I'm Adam Wheeler and I've talked enough, so I'm pleased to be joined by...
David Emmett.
And...
Neil Morrison.
Isn't that baritone so comforting? So lads, very quickly, 1 to 10, how would you grade the German GP and why?
I would give the sprint race 5 out of 10 because it was a bit boring. Main race 8 out of 10, which was it was a really, really good race. Not a all-time classic, but it very, very thrilling and entertaining.
Neil, David told us that we're just going to have a number and not explain anything, and then he explained it. So
I just can't help myself.
Yeah, I'll give it a 9. Decent weather on race day, good crowds, good company. And a main race that actually surprised us. I was expecting a bit of a bore because the sprint race was a bit of a bore. And it looked as though no one would be able to match Jorge Martin over the race. But we actually had a bit of a thriller that went the way down to the wire. So yeah, I would give it a 9.
That was an even longer explanation. I'll say an 8 out of 10. Weather, people, action, it was pretty good. The only thing missing was like Mugello pizza. But we did pretty well with Vietnamese, Indian, and... We stayed away from the media centre, Frankfurt. So if anybody listening to this is ever fortunate to get a media pass for the Sachsenring German Grand Prix, stay away from the media centre, Bratwurst and Frankfurts.
Even the vegetables had meat in them. There was potato soup which had meat in, and there was potato salad which had meat in, and I think there was another soup which also had meat in.
Dave, other than riding your motorcycle to this Grand Prix, what was your moment of the weekend?
My moment of the weekend was riding my motorcycle from here into the race, into the circuit in the morning. I mean, apart from the fact it's always just a lovely ride, it was really heartening to see full crowds and a very mixed crowd, a lot of young people, a lot of women, girls, men, boys. Everything. It was really mixed. It's really important for the future of the sport that we see young people going to races. This is the heart of motorcycle racing, this region in Germany. They love racing here. So yeah, it really was it was really heartening to see.
Neil?
Well, I mean, 2 moments if you'll allow me to have 2. The first was probably going out during morning warm-up. You can go just outside the paddock and stand between the entrance to turn 1 and the outside of turn 11. So you're so close to the guys entering turn 1. You can see them basically putting everything on the front tire, back wheel coming up in the air, and they just come straight past you. If you put your arm out, you would be able to touch them. And then you basically have to turn around, take 2 steps, and you're looking across at the guys descending the Ralph Waltman curve, which was pretty cool. And with regards to racing, I would have to say Johann Zarco's full-blooded move on Brad Binder at the end of the sprint, the last lap. I mean, it was pretty on the line. It was just about, I guess, within the limits of racing. It was a last lap overtake. Really, really impressive stuff from Zarco. A little bit naughty. And thankfully...
But naughty but nice, right?
Yeah. Thankfully, though, Brad managed to get through it. And Zarco loves that place. I think he put one of his best passes ever on Aleix Espargaro there last year. And he passed Marini there, I think, in the main race on Sunday. So, yeah, Zarco was absolutely box office through the waterfall.
There was a bit of retribution about that, wasn't there, after the first lap contact in the sprint, I think, between Binder and Zarco. At the time, like you say, it was a bit naughty. We thought it was hazardous, right, Dave? I mean, we watched it together in the media centre, and then...
Your initial reaction was like, you can't do that. That's the most dangerous place on the track. And then you go back and you watch it, it's like, oh, wow. I mean, it's absolutely right on the limit. And it is the last lap, and you have to allow people to try to pass.
And Brad did make a bit of a mistake in the previous turn because he was trying to line up Luca Marini and altered his line and slowed himself down in the end. So, the opportunity was there.
But he said also when Zarco came through, if he didn't anticipate and pick up, then he said he wouldn't be here anymore, which I thought was quite a poetic way of saying he would have been in big trouble. But I asked Zarco about it in the debrief on Saturday, and he had crashed there earlier on in the day, so it was quite feasible he could have taken himself and Binder both to the moon. But then he went into great detail describing the crash and how it was... quite unexpected, and that move was all just part of his arsenal. For me, my moment was similar place down the exit of turn 1. Jorge Martin, I think, is past the past two riders in the sprint, pretty much set the tone for his weekend and his capabilities on this particular racetrack.
Turn 12.
Coming down turn 11 into turn 12. Thank you, Neil. Let's not get too pedantic, shall we? In the press conference, Martin said that he found podium confidence recently after Mugello, Dave, and now he has winning confidence. So it seems that all is in bloom with, the rider who took his second MotoGP career victory. Let's talk about him for a moment. One of my sort of big discussion points is Martin a championship contender? Can we look at him and think, he's on a similar bike to the world champion at the moment? Neil Aleix Espargaro had quite an interesting comment in his debrief earlier in the weekend, didn't he?
He did, yeah. To answer your question, first of all, on recent evidence, you would have to say he is a title contender. For the second weekend in succession, we saw Ducati have a ridiculous advantage over the rest of the field. KTM, the only other manufacturer that were in some way able to mount any kind of defense, but 8 bikes in the top 9 tell you all you need to know about where Ducati are at the moment around a track that used to be horrible for them. This used to be their worst track in the calendar, and now they're putting 8 bikes in the top 9. It's quite remarkable.
2008 was the last win, so they don't have any kind of previous record there.
Yeah, exactly. Martin is, he's not in the factory team, but he's on the latest GP23, and he has managed to... There was a few things that you would, at the start of the year, you would say were definitely weaknesses in his armory. One of them was consistency. Another one was aggression. Didn't necessarily show the requisite aggression. And we had seen him come under serious pressure and perform in Moto3 when he was fighting for the championship in 2018, but we hadn't seen him put under serious pressure in MotoGP before. His debut win at the Red Bull Ring back in 21, John Mir was there or thereabouts, but Martin was on the superior bike, and it was quite different, I think, on Sunday when it was Pecco Bagnaia, the world champion, chasing him down and trying to pass him, outwit him, and that was a whole different type of pressure. So I think he excelled in all 3 of those aspects. His aggression from 6th on the grid, coming through to first within 1 lap or 2 laps, and then holding his nerve towards the end. And this is his 6th podium if you count the sprints in a row. He has managed to get that consistency together. Yes, he's on the best bike in the grid, but he's managing to make it work, and he's 14 points off Bagnaia now. It's quite
16,
interesting.
I think. 16
probably. Sorry, Dave. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's interesting, and it's good because I think we all feared that Pecco was perhaps going to piss off into the distance, but Martin does look as though he might actually have something to offer.
It's great that somebody, like you say, is keeping Bagnaia in check. And like Espargaro said, that he believed that Bagnaia is the complete package, whereas Martin is more or less the rider in form, maybe has more outright raw talent for the quick lap.
Yeah, and he said, without question, he thinks Martin is the more talented rider than Pecco. He said, Pecco, yeah, as you said, more complete. He's got the number one in his bike. That shows that he's the better rider if you analyze all his skill sets. But he said in terms of explosivity and just raw talent, then he thinks that Martin is definitely a superior rider, which is interesting.
But are we getting ahead of ourselves, Dave? I mean, if we took the Grand Prix races, then it's 3 podiums in a row, one of them victories. It's not like Martin has gone 1-1-1 in the last 3 Grand Prix. Maybe by Assen and going into the summer break, if he's again in the top 3 or again victorious, then we have to say, okay, now we have to look at Martin as arguably more than Bezzecchi as the most viable championship threat to Bagnaia. But then also, guys, we know that Martin doesn't bounce very well, so we haven't really seen him down the road yet.
Can I pour cold water on any championship talk by pointing out that there are 481 points still left in the championship, which is 3 times as many as the championship leader, Pecco Bagnaia. So there is just an insane amount of points still left in the championship. It is way too early. I think what you can say is that Bagnaia is looking, again, like the complete package. He's looking very controlled, even though he finished second today. They found something. They made an improvement from yesterday, and just managed to. I think this was something that Jorge Martin said as well. When you and your team can make that kind of step forward from Saturday to Sunday, it means that you're very good.
Yeah, and he was saying in warm-up, he was looking at Pecco's data after the warm-up session. He was like, is this the same guy as yesterday? Because Bagnaia had made such an enormous step, I think, in the long series of left corners, Sector 2, which is where he was losing a lot of time. On the brakes, he was great in the sprint, but Sector 2, losing a lot of time in the sprint. But then, like we've seen so often with Pecco, come Sunday, that's when he's most formidable.
Yeah, and he's very calm, very patient, hasn't panicked. We've seen a couple of mistakes this year, but again, he just seems to be able to click, get it to click and make it work. Can Martin challenge for the championship? 100%. He has the talent, he has the speed. The real test will be when we get further down the season, closer to the end. If he's still in contention, what happens when he starts getting real pressure? Right now, I mean, as I said, there's so many points still left. You could afford to make a mistake. I mean,
KTM currently have a problem, trying to fit Pedro Acosta into their MotoGP lineup, and we'll get onto that later. And Jorge Martin has actually been referenced by some KTM management as a rider who didn't have the patience, or he didn't want to hang around for another year, say Moto2, in order to be able to squeeze into KTM's MotoGP plans. Martin obviously, is one of the star riders in MotoGP. I wonder how much this year as well, Dave O'Neill, he's riding like a man scorned, because he was passed over for the Enea Bastianini saddle. And we're doing a disservice to Enea because he's been injured. We haven't seen anything like his proper potential on the factory bike, and whether it's higher than what he achieved last year on an older machine. But I think Martin is probably maximising everything he has. He's doing the opposite of Maverick and maximising his potential and taking everything out.
Exactly, and not just that. There's a reason for it as well. He did feel really scorned by the fact that he didn't get a factory rad. However, in his contract, he has a 2-year contract, but he also has in his contract that if he's offered a factory ride somewhere else, Ducati can offer him, make a counter offer to put him in the factory team. So his dream of ending up in the factory Ducati team is not yet dead. I mean, he is. Bastianini has been injured. We really have to wait for the second half of the season to see what Bastianini can do. But right now it is Martin who is really performing.
But Bastianini is not on a 1-year deal, and Ducati not going to cast him aside that quickly, would they? To say,
well, they wouldn't cast him aside. They'd just put him in the Pramac team. I mean, that's all it would do. It would just be like it would be a game of swapsies.
It seems a little unrealistic. I mean, if Martin, we were linking him to the factory Yamaha team. And, we were kind of asking riders at the end of the day, on Sunday day, would you accept a contract to be a factory rider for a Japanese manufacturer at this point, considering there are 8 Ducatis in the top 10 plus a KTM?
And they were all really nervous about answering that question.
Yeah, and there were a couple of Luca Marini had a big smile on his face. I still think Marini's a good shoe-in, for the ride next to Fabio Quartararo if Franco Morbidelli moves out. And Morbidelli now in his debriefs was saying he wants to continue with Yamaha, despite the comments after Mugello, where it was a case of like, well, that's clearly a division and a split there. There was lots of tones or gestures towards his current team saying he wants to continue. Again, you and I were discussing in the car when we were driving here to record the podcast, what is the difference between a satellite contract and a factory contract? There's obviously going to be, a monetary difference, but then also in terms of the resources at your disposal. Bagnaia brought up the subject in Le Mans quite infamously. The differences now between factory riders and satellite riders is perhaps minuscule. I mean, Jorge Martin could win the World Championship this year.
He could. At the moment, it's still very much theoretical. You have to wait until we get to a situation where it's a realistic possibility to see whether Ducati would want their factory rider to win rather than a satellite rider. I mean, this was also. I mean, if Jorge Martin did win the World Championship, they would have a very, very simple solution, which would be to put him in the factory team the next year, so he's still got the number one plate. But yeah, I mean, like I say, at the moment it's a bit theoretical. The differences are absolutely minimal between the bikes, especially between Pramac and the factory team. But the factory team just have more resources. They just by sheer weight of data engineers and various other engineers wandering about, they can make the difference.
Well, we've completed the sprint element of the podcast. We're just going to head into a quick break, and then we'll be back for the main thing, where we're going to tackle the big talking point, I guess, from the Grand Prix aside from results, and that's Marc Marquez.
Renthal fat bars are synonymous with off-road world champions. The Renthal Street Fat Bar draws from decades of experience to create the ultimate 28mm handlebar in a range of street-specific bends. Whether you're looking to alter the height, width, rise, or sweep of your handlebar, Renthal Street handlebars offer a bend to suit your requirements. Use the WorksFit handlebar comparison tool at renthal.com to find the perfect bend.
Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast. Before we continue, just to show how insightful and expertful we are on the Paddock Pass podcast, we're going to play you a little bit of an excerpt from last week's show. Quite importantly, Marc's level of competitiveness this weekend will say a lot for Honda's current state.
Marc owns the Sachsenring. It's as simple as that. He just doesn't get beaten there because it is all lots and lots of long left corners, which is his speciality. I have already put Marc Marquez in my fantasy team. It's hard to see anyone beating him.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I was expecting Marc to go in two-footed on Honda after the race in Mugello. From that, I was taking that Marc was thinking, you know what, actually, good track's coming up for us now.
David and Neil, you stand accused of...
being absolute idiots.
Of being slightly off with your miscalculation. How do you plead?
Guilty, Your Honour.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are absolutely banged to rights.
Put the handcuffs on.
Yeah, exactly. In my defence, Your Honour, I would say that it wasn't Marc Marquez who failed here. It was Honda, because Honda had a horrible weekend. Absolutely horrendous weekend. Taka Nakagami had a massive crash. Marc Marquez had 5 crashes. I think 3 on Saturday. 3 was it 3 in the space of 38 minutes? Or 30 minutes? Yeah, 28 minutes. Yeah, it's.
Joan Mir's Honda was being pilfered for parts at one point.
Yeah, exactly. Joan Mir is already out. Alex Rins is already out. The bike is right now. The bike is just an absolute liability. It's
can't be trusted.
Yeah, well, it's worse than the worst time of the 500 era almost. It just, because Marc's massive high side in warm-up on Saturday or Sunday morning, Taka Nakagami was following and he was explaining, it's like, he wasn't on the limit, he wasn't pushing, he wasn't really doing anything wrong. The bike just suddenly just let go. And that's the problem with this bike. It's the operating window is so incredibly narrow. As I said on the Note Show last night, the operating window, it reminds me a lot of the 2009-2010 Ducati 2011 as well, where the operating window of the bike is so narrow. It will work if you get everything exactly right. If you then throw in the Michelin tires, which have a relatively narrow temperature operating window where they're really good, it makes it really difficult to get everything exactly right, getting exactly the right setup for exactly the right temperature for exactly the right tires. And if you don't do that, then the rear will let go. The front will let go. You're going to end up in the gravel. You're going to end up getting hurt, and that's exactly what happened to Mark.
Yeah, I mean, Taka was pretty interesting to speak to over the weekend. He
was more honest, brutally honest than I think I've heard him in a long time.
Yeah, possibly ever. Yeah, and I guess he had to be. And you get the impression that people in the race teams are having to be a bit open and a bit tough to get the message through to Japan that this is a dire situation. This is a kind of an emergency. Taka was saying that 4 or 5 times a lap during the sprint, his front tire was closing, or his front was closing. He was saying there was no grip at all. Rear was coming around, corner exit, so aggressive. And I mean, those are probably the 2 most fundamental parts of kind of bike feeling.
But then the defense states that there have been 7 Grand Prix this year, 6 have been won by Ducati, and the only other brand to have won another one is Honda. So the bike can win. Like you say, Dave, maybe Alex Rins was operating on another level that day in Austin. But then also, like you said, the Honda was in a sweet spot.
Yeah, but what good is having a bike that can win at one track in an entire calendar year?
With a rider who is especially good and particularly good at that particular track.
Yeah, and then, injures 3 of its men quite seriously, at other tracks.
But Neil, Cal Crutchlow hobbles around, and he was the only other individual that could push the bike in the last 6-7 years to victory. Well, we know Marc Marquez has made the difference for Honda for the past decade.
Yeah, but the difference now is that Honda, that bike was very difficult to ride, and if you pushed over the limit, it would crash. But generally, the front would go, so you'd end up in the gravel. Riders will accept the front going because the crash is generally less violent. The danger is what we see, for example, at turn 11 here, where it's a fast crash. You come off, you hit the gravel, and then you start tumbling. But most front low sides are you slide, you hit the gravel. It's painful. You end up with burns, but you don't break anything. It's the high sides which are really, really dangerous. That's the difference between now and 3 or 4 years ago. People are getting thrown into the sky, and they're picking up properly serious injuries.
Yeah, and we're in 2023. We're not in 1991 racing 500s. What other MotoGP machine on the grid has consistent high sides? I mean, there's no other bike.
No, I can't think of another bike which will spit you off like that.
Exactly, yeah. And we're not just talking about this year. We're talking about, think back to Paul Espargaro's time, think back to Jorge Lorenzo's time. I mean, huge crashes that have caused all of those guys to miss races. And, one of the most damning statistics was... that was the second time this year in 7 races that neither Repsol Honda has been on the grid. 75% of the rider lineup was missing yesterday on Sunday's grid. I mean, this is pretty damning. This is not something that can be rectified. They're so far off now. 2017 or 2016 years when the bike was difficult to ride in the past and the riders were crashing a lot, they were a little bit behind Ducati, perhaps you could say, a little bit. But now we're talking about 20 seconds over a race. It's a massive, massive difference, and I mean it's not just the bike. It's the kind of the way of working, the attitude, the philosophy, the reaction times at Honda, which is causing problems. It does sound as though people within the Repsol and LCR teams are becoming increasingly frustrated and fed up with the lack of urgency with which this problem is being dealt with. And you just have to say, like, this is an urgent situation. They don't have time to deal with this, and everything is taking way too much time.
Yeah, the Honda way, the Japanese factory way, is to test everything to destruction before actually putting it on the bike. They don't want things to break down, so they test and they test and they test. They want to make sure it works. They want to make sure it's better, and they wait for a long time. Ducati and KTM have shown that is not the way to make progress in MotoGP now. What you do is you put things on the bike as soon as possible if you think they might be an improvement. If you don't, you take them off. To make progress, you have to work.
I mean, there's a certain amount of sympathy for logistics, especially post-pandemic, maybe for Japanese factories just to put the same kind of speed and resources into their racing projects might be more difficult now. But, I mean, just to speculate further, Dave, putting you on the spot, if we have to identify a flaw in Honda's concept, which was only new 2 years ago, they redesigned the RCV, I mean, would we say electronics? I mean, they changed their electronics engineer for this season. Maybe that would explain the high sides. I don't know.
I mean, they've always had a problem with electronics. The electronics of the Honda has always been bad
since 2016.
Basically since 2016, since they could no longer write their own software, since they had to start using the Magneti Marelli software. What they really need is an external person to come in and sort their electronics out. But it has also got worse and worse and worse and worse over the years. Also, the way that they changed the bike, what they did with this new concept bike was, because the old bike had no rear grip and was all front end, what they really ideally wanted was to create more rear grip while retaining the same front end feel. What they ended up doing was sacrificing front end feel and still not producing any rear grip. They're going to have to go away and build a completely new bike again. And it's a lengthy process, it's at least a year.
Yeah, and what are the chances of them getting it right? I mean, the last time they did it, they failed miserably. Do they have the expertise at their disposal in this new era of MotoGP when such an emphasis is placed on aerodynamics, such an emphasis is placed on ride-height devices? I was told quite an interesting story yesterday that involved one of Honda's ex-riders that had come from a rival manufacturer, ex-rider. They came with one or two little tidbits of little secrets from the previous factory where they were saying, look, previous bike does this at the start, the launch control does this, and the bike does this. It's an improvement. And they were told in no unspecific terms that by the time that got the okay from Japan to go through all the testing and whether it's the right way forward, it would take the best part of a year, a full season to implement that on the Honda. So that's what they're up against.
I was also told a story that the Repsol Honda team, of course, mostly European, a large percentage of it, they have their own sense of urgency, of course, because they're the ones rebuilding the bloody thing every session. There was, an attempt to get external engineers from another manufacturer into the team, and this apparently was blocked by HRC, which I guess is their right. If they have their own, engineering team inside Japan, why would you also feel the need to? Well, we've explained why. You need that external input, but then, also
look what KTM have done.
Yes, exactly. There's the proof in the pudding.
Yeah. I mean, like it's Ducati steel engineers, KTM steel engineers, Aprilia steel engineers. That's the way you make progress.
But this is why I find it so difficult to understand, because back in the day, Honda used to steal engineers. You think back to whenever they signed Casey Stoner in 2011, they went and poached Stoner. They poached Christian Gambarini, his crew chief. They went to Yamaha at some point around that time.
They went to Yamaha. They got two electronic engineers, including Andrea Zugno. Those two guys made a huge difference, and they
won a world championship.
Yeah, exactly. They need to go back to that sense of urgency.
And you wonder that was when Nakamoto was kind of the main man within Honda's MotoGP operation, and you just wonder whether his capacity, his ability, his authority maybe had a bit more sway with the factory in Japan.
I think it is really the amount of political, the personality of the Japanese
head of projects.
Vice president. The vice president of HRC, who effectively runs Honda's MotoGP project. That is the person who matters most, because that is the person who can make the decisions. His personality, his political sway within HRC, his ability to make decisions, basically decides what happens to Honda.
I also heard there was an approval process of at least half a year to get a Calyx piece of equipment on the RCV, like you said, Dave, you just have to move faster than that.
Yeah,
otherwise,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah,
Be left behind.
They flew the Calyx chassis to Japan. They put it on their chassis dyno. They twisted, bended, tested it, shook it up and down, make sure it worked. Stuck it in the fridge for 6 weeks to see if it would come out in one piece. All that sort of stuff, just to see how the thing reacted, to see if it was up to spec. Yes, that is useful. That is extremely useful. But you could also just be doing that in parallel with the with the bike, with the riding.
And this leaves us with the question: where does Marquez go from here? Because you had the impression the way he was riding was as if he was trying to show that he could still do it. He could still win a race. I think it's his longest margin in the Premier class without a win, going all the way back to Misano 2021 at the end of that year.
602 days it would have been.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's now 603 days since his last win.
That's also partly down to his contribution and, the state of his arm. He's made decisions on the surgery there. But we'll get on to Mark in a moment now, because going back to the HRC, Dave, I can remember Nakamoto coming to MXGP and brazenly saying the Honda wanted the full set. Dakar was the only thing they had left to win. Tim Geiger won the World Championship for them in the Premier class in 2016. I think it was the first time, goodness, in a long, long time. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. And Honda had that kind of, I don't want to say arrogance because that's the wrong word, but sense of superiority at the time, because Marquez was winning everything. They were obviously the motorcycle in Moto 2. The Honda was the bike to have, it seemed at most levels.
But they are the biggest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. They sell the most manufacturer in the world. They're the leading Japanese manufacturer. At the end of every summer during graduation, when all the leading Japanese engineering students graduate, Honda get first pick, basically. So they get the cream of the crop.
And don't forget also, they were the pioneers of the four-stroke MotoGP era. Valentino Rossi just used to clear off. If you needed 10 extra seconds of Phillip Island, then, no problem, I'll deliver. And I think it's hard if you talk about cultural differences in factories, to suddenly think, well, MotoGP, we're uncompetitive now for 2 years. Let's quickly turn it around. I just don't think there's the possibility within big corporations like that to be able to, it's like a tanker, put it in reverse. How long is it going to take to actually turn?
Yeah, but again, it comes down to the political, to the personality and the political power of the person in charge. And I'm not sure. Kawata-san, who's vice president of HRC, seems extremely competent, but I'm not sure that he has the power to radically transform that engineering department in the way that Gigi Dall'Igna radically transformed the engineering department in Ducati. Not even by far, because he didn't sack anyone. He just started rotating engineers in and out of the test team, the race team, so that everyone understood what everyone else's problem was.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. But going back to what you said now about Mark, and we had observations in our show last week coming to Sachsenring, and not even Mark. Who would want to ride a Honda? Joan Mir must have been watching the exploits of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from his sofa yesterday, thinking, "Christ, I've got to go to Assen next week and get on that thing." I just don't think it's appealing anymore, is it? It can't. Of course, there is all the external stuff of being a factory rider for HRC. It's still a big deal. Carries prestige, I guess you could say. But, if you're Pedro Acosta, what would you rather do? Take a satellite Ducati and get paid $100,000?
Yes.
Or, take $1 million and be on a Honda?
You would take a satellite Ducati and you would pay to ride that satellite Ducati over riding the Honda currently. You would. It's a career ender as it stands. Where does Joan Mir's career go from this? It's, he was one of the hottest prospects in the Grand Prix Paddock a couple of years ago, and now he is in risk of being the forgotten man. Yet you would pay all of the money in your bank account to ride a satellite Ducati right now over a Honda.
I think we need to not underestimate the hubris of the motorcycle racer, because they truly believe that they are better than everyone else. They truly believe that they can make the difference. They truly believe, or at least they're truly capable of kidding themselves, that it will be different this time.
They reach a point where they look at their scars, though, right? And it hurts to get out of bed.
Yeah, but that's usually, about halfway through the second year of the contract, and that's not there. I think there are still a lot of riders who say, no, you would take a factory contact. I can't remember who it was, because we asked so many riders about like signing for Yamaha or signing for Honda, and they all said, no, you take a factory contact. For a start, the money. Secondly, just the fact that you get a direct influence on the bike, you can actually influence the bike. That I think is where they're going wrong, because it is absolutely patently obvious that you're not getting any influence on the bike because the engineers aren't listening.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say, ask Paul Espargaro about how much influence he had on the Honda in his 2 years there.
Yeah. Ask any test rider, like what the Japanese factories do with their feedback, and they will tell you, they write it down, they say it's very interesting, and then they go away and sort of, ignore it.
I wonder if Stefan Bradl's having some chicken that's gone by its sell-by date, or
that's right. Yeah, that's right. He's going through the seafood section looking for the oldest box of prawns in there.
Yeah, and he hasn't washed his hands in days. Yeah.
Neil, what was your take on Mark this weekend? Because for me, it was one of those, a full sympathy to him and what he's going through, but it was one of those sporting scaffolds, to take a Shakespearean term, where we arrive at a circuit where he's won 11 times. You guys were on the money by saying we cannot rule Marc Marquez out. I even put him in my fantasy team.
So did I. Almost boosted him as well.
And, we expected a result from him against the odds, like he's done so many times. And to win that many races, the Honda wasn't the best bike, as we said, that many years. But this was a case of, like, on Marc Marquez's stage, it all went horribly wrong. I mean, he fell through it with a massive smash. And it all started really from... the sense of desperation just went up from the moment he started hitting Marco Bezzecchi, in the wet P2, I want to say, on Friday.
No, that was Saturday morning.
Saturday morning, okay. Well, from the crash, over 5 crashes in total. Things like running across the track after being assisted up, to the vicious high side, basically in warm-up, a 10-minute session on Sunday morning. Even led Jack Miller to sort of give quite an emotional reaction in his debrief yesterday. It was just a catalogue of utter despair for Mark, and he must be really sore.
Yeah, it was hideous. Like, it was sort of like Indonesia last year, when he just sort of threw caution to the wind, and he throttled off in the sprint race, but was clearly trying to give it some. He did say after qualifying and those 3 crashes, he crashed 3 times, put everything into it, and he still only qualified 7th at the Sachsenring. So that was, I think, what influenced him to roll off a little bit in the sprint race and just accept an 11th place. But yeah, it's terrible. What does he do? He's got a year and a half left in his contract. You can see that, as you mentioned, this sort of tanker it's going to take a long time to turn around. But what are the options available to him? That's the kind of difficult thing. Obviously, if there was a seat open to him next year, you'd think he would jump at it, but I just don't see what seats there are.
Yeah, I don't think there are any.
We don't know, the monetary factor aside, and you'd assume that Mark really never needs to worry about money again in his career. We don't know how he can get out of his contract, if he can get out of his contract. We're unlikely to know until you'll see a headline somewhere. But Dave, what do we think about kind of the general public's reaction to what Marquez is doing? It seems to fall very much into the case of people damning his actions, his ludicrousy, and then also other people just admiring the ability to keep picking himself up and keep having a go.
Yeah, I think people either admire his mental strength or they think he's just insane.
A hazard in wheels.
Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of that sort of he's a danger to people, but the person he's a danger to is himself. A lot of people were slagging off Marc Marquez. Like, all you need to do is look to see how many Hondas there were on the grid even in the sprint race. The fact that there's one Honda rider sitting at home with a broken leg. There's another rider sitting at home with an injured hand. Now, Mark missed the race with, a broken thumb and various other injuries. Yeah. Nakagami went for a good old tumble through turn 11 and was pretty sore and battered and bruised. you have to leave Marquez aside at the moment. This has got absolutely nothing to do with Marquez. The bike is a liability. If Marquez has a weakness, it's that he is trying to overcome this and losing the battle every single time.
That's why he deserves credit, perhaps.
Yeah, that's why. Exactly. That's why he deserves credit. I mean, like, he used to be able to do this. He used to be able to overcome the shortcomings of the bike. But right now, the bike is winning, and that is, and I don't mean that in the good sense. You know, the bike is beating Marquez, and that is that just illustrates the dangerous situation that HRC is in.
Is it true also that Honda asked him not to ride? It wasn't his call on Sunday morning. That was
well, there's a mixed bag. Apparently, well, I heard that he was up for riding, but then I was told as the morning progressed and the pain kicked in, he was more willing to accept the idea of not riding.
Yeah, but it was Honda who were. I think Honda were more keen on him not riding. You know, they wanted him not to ride. Mark was sort of like thinking, well, no, let's give it a go. But
it's not a good look, is it? I mean, this is like Yamaha Red Bull Ring. We apologise to our riders because our engines and motorcycles are not good enough at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean,
even then, Yamaha's riders weren't getting spat off and injured. You know, they were just uncompetitive.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a difference here.
But also, like, it was getting to the point where Mark was just not fit enough. I mean, the fact that he wore sunglasses in his Dorna interview immediately sort of has kicked off speculation about whether the diplopia. I hate that. I really hate. I mean,
his vision.
His vision. Yeah, whether he's got double vision again. It's just sheer speculation. We have no idea about any of that.
It's poor PR though for Honda if Marquez gets into the race and crashes again, or even inadvertently hits someone else.
Yeah, it would be even worse if he crashes and hits someone else. So I mean, and he had nothing to gain by riding. You know, he was only going to end up. You know, it would have been battling for the top 10, and what's the point?
Lastly, just to wrap up this subject with Marc Marquez. He is out of the championship. He's got nothing to do. I mean, Jack Miller again said, "Look, just do your job, ride the bike."
Don't be a princess.
Don't be a princess. You have to be professional in that respect, and I'm sure Mark turns up and he wants to win, regardless of what motorcycle he's riding. But do we think this is the end of Marc Marquez and Honda? A relationship that when he came into MotoGP in 2013 and slayed everybody, laid waste to everything. 2019, still, a very peerless season, it has to be said, in Grand Prix racing. Do we think there's a contract renewal?
No. I mean, is this the end of his relationship? No, because he's got a year and a half left in his contract, and as we were just saying, there's no other real viable options for him currently. So yeah, I think he'll at least see out this season. But is this the end of Mark and Honda being a winning force? I mean, they haven't been a winning force for 3.5 years now, so that time passed quite some time ago. But the possibility of them becoming a winning force again, yeah, I think that's the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I think the outburst against Johann Zarco in that crash on Friday, there was so much frustration there that I think that was very much sort of like displaced frustration. That was more just anger at Honda, anger at the situation, anger at everything, lashing out. I think that marks the end that was a sign that this relationship is over.
Yeah, Mark was criticised for not going to check on Zarco's state at turn 1. In his defence, I think on the TV pictures you see he was looking across to check he was all right, could see that he was, Zarco was moving. Yeah, so, and then of course it was towards the end of the session. I mean, it depends on how much you want someone to look after someone. That's, as we said, Marquez, like it or not, is really attracting a lot of discussion in MotoGP at the moment. And somebody else, another name we should talk about when it comes to, winning relationships, Pedro Acosta. Fantastic, achievement, winning again in Moto2, looking competitive in the rain as well. Pointed that out, Neil. There is an urgency to get him out of Moto2 now, isn't there? Despite his youth, despite his relative lack of time in Grand Prix racing. I think it's only his third full season in Grand Prix. And, how on earth do KTM find a space for him It's becoming like a real big Tetris puzzle.
Yeah, it is, and it's getting to the point where he cannot be ignored any longer, because he's basically showing that he is. Well, I mean, he's not leading the championship, but the last 2 performances have indicated that, he's the fastest guy in the championship. Won 4 out of the 7 races. And, like the noises KTM were making before this weekend at the Sachsenring were that we're happy with our rider lineup, 4 riders in MotoGP. We want Pedro to do another season in Moto2. And there's a deadline, maybe roughly around the end of this month or the start of July, that if we don't exercise an option with him, then he can look elsewhere. Interesting story on Speed Week this morning by Gunther Riesinger, who obviously has excellent connections at KTM. He was interviewing Pitt yesterday, Pitt Byrer, and Pitt was saying, we're going to have to make this work with Pedro, even if it means bringing him to Moto2 next year. We might have to move some parts around, make something work. We have to keep hold of him, because the article cited, Jorge Martin and how he escaped KTM, and now look at the success he's having with Ducati. It mentioned how other options had been explored, such as promoting Aki Ayo's team into MotoGP with Acosta as their single rider, but that isn't allowed because I think the independent teams are all locked in until the end of 26.
Yeah.
Apparently, even the idea was floated by Dorna to put Augusto Fernandez in Gresini Ducati for a year next year to accommodate Acosta, which shows you that Dorna is really pushing to have Acosta in MotoGP because they see him as a big character, as a great story, something that might attract Spanish fans. We're hearing a lot of things recently that viewing numbers in Spain have been way down, and that's the kind of market that they need to reignite. So yeah, it does point to him being in MotoGP next year, this interview with Pitt, and it very much was a kind of change of tack from what we heard at Mugello.
Well, added to that, I mean, Jake Dixon was in the same press conference, and there's also urgency to try and get a Brit in MotoGP. So Dixon even told us, in the press conference yesterday that he's talking to a couple of teams. So there's a lot going on with city season. But Dave, is it possible that KTM could get Ayo to run a one-bike effort like Irv Kanemoto did with Eddie Lawson back in '89? It just like stick a KTM onto the official. Or do we know there's a ruling that could stop that?
There is well, the ruling is there's no room for independent teams. There's only room for factory teams. So it would have to be a factory effort. The only factory capable of doing that at the moment is KTM by fielding a Husqvarna. I think, I am not sure. I think I haven't checked the regulations, but I think that it says that all factory teams have to be 2 bikes, have to be 2 riders. This again amended after Suzuki ran a single bike in 2011, I think. So yeah, it would be very difficult to sort of move people around. But yeah, there's no point in Pedro Acosta having another year in Moto2
unless he's getting big win bonuses.
Yeah, but he doesn't want to be in Moto2. Like, he obviously wants to go to MotoGP. It's fairly obvious that he doesn't really has no interest in Moto2. I think even if he ended up not winning the championship, he would still want to move to MotoGP, and he's ready for MotoGP. He's just an exceptional talent.
Well, Assen is next, and there's bound to be more meetings, with agents, managers, and whatever else. So I hope we'll tackle this Acosta angle a little bit more in a podcast, maybe in the summer break, because I think there's quite a bit to get into, because we're not even talking about the riders that are bound to push up into Moto2 next year, like, Daniel Holgado, Dennis Onchu, who had a fantastically measured performance, and he beat Ayumu Sasaki, who's also looking to come up, next year into Moto2. He said to us that, he actually should be racing in Moto2 this year. The reason we know that is because we've got a great interview with him, thanks to Husqvarna Motorcycles. And the Japanese, fantastically well-spoken, been arguably near the reference for speed on a consistent basis in Moto3 this year. And anyway, here's Ayumu. Ayumu, it's fantastic to talk to you. My first question for you is a bit strange.
Okay.
Because you seem such a nice, calm guy. So why Crazy Boy?
Oof, this is something many people asked me before, but it was long time ago. I mean, I'm still young, I guess, but when I was 14, I started to race abroad, so I I went out from Japan and start to race Asia Talent Cup, which is like a donor championship. I don't know why suddenly many people called me a crazy boy. Maybe I was a bit crazy on the track. Also, it's not in a like crazy boy. I also like a lot of jokes. When I'm with my older team, we make joke all the time. So maybe I was making joke off the track as well. So everybody started to call me crazy boy, and I don't know. In Europe, maybe it's normal, but in Asia, it's not really normal to be open to a lot of people. So maybe that's why they start to call me crazy boy.
Well, if we look at your career from Red Bull rookies, I mean, you've been like a steady progression, and it's come to a point now, I think, where fans watching in Moto3 and your combination with the Husqvarna, it's you're incredibly consistent. Every track you go to, your name is at the top of the time screens, it seems, from Friday. When you look at your progression from the first years, are you happy, or do you think, oh, maybe I should have been faster, quicker, like an Acosta? How do you feel about it?
I think in the end, I'm happy where I am at the moment. It's different to all the Europe riders, as we grew up in Asia. It's such a different country, and when I was fighting in Asia Talent Cup, everybody was Asian, so I had no problem. Rookies Cup, Red Bull Rookies Cup also seems to be not a big issue, but I only rode 1 year in a Spanish championship, which is a same bike as a Moto3 bike, only 1 or 2 years older bikes, and I didn't get to use that bike so much before I came to World Championship. So probably right now, maybe I came to the World Championship a little bit too early. I had opportunity, so I took it because I won the Rookies Cup as well, but I didn't ride much that bike. But then all the Spanish rider start to ride Spanish Championship maybe when I was in an Asian Talent Cup, which is 14 or 13. So maybe it took me 2-3 more years in the World Championship to be competitive. But finally I find the correct team, a good team as well, people as well. I needed to find strengths also off the track, not only on the track, because I'm on my own here in Europe. My family can't travel all the way here and live with me, so I needed to make everything on my own, like off the track. I need to find the people who support me as well, and I think everything came together maybe last 2 years, and now I think we are in a good moment.
Does that come also with some personal maturity, just as you grow up and you learn to deal with situations and things like pressure?
Yeah, well, when I was 16, I was thinking I'm okay, but if I think about it now, definitely I was like younger, and of course I was not coping with many things well, and now I'm 22 and I can, cope with many things. I can do almost all the things without having my parents. Is maybe starting from 2 years ago. So definitely I was too young at the time.
Where are you, because the season is so long, if we count pre-season tests, where are you based during the year when you're not at home?
Right now I live in Barcelona, and I believe that's the best place to stay, to train. There's also many Spanish riders, you can see. There's many track. The weather is always amazing. So
decent food.
Yeah, also good food. So that's why I stay in Spain. I hope I can go back to Japan, but I think Spain is the best place to prepare for the races.
Ayumu, your speed this year, is that based on your familiarity with the Husqvarna from last year? Is it just a continuation?
Yeah, last year had been an amazing season with Husqvarna, and I had injury last year. In middle of the year, that stopped us quite a lot. But through the second half of the season, I scored maybe second most in a Moto3 class. Izan Guevara won the championship maybe, but second half of the season I was maybe second in championship if I take a second part of the season points. So already last year we were very quick. this year we are keeping the momentum. I made small mistake beginning of the season with 2 crashes, but we're definitely showing the speed. So right now we are coming back and trying to catch the front guys.
I mean, your maturity again was on show, because after you got back on the podium, you were relaxed. You weren't going, crazy in the last laps to take a win or whatever. I mean, it was a fantastic approach. Those mistakes that you made earlier on, what kind of character are you? Is it something you think about a lot for some days after the GP, or is it something you can forget quite quickly?
I tried to forget. I did forget the first one in Argentina because it was rain condition and it was very difficult condition. But the one in America was difficult to forget because I was reading a race. I thought that I was riding not on the limit. I thought I was riding maybe 90% of my best, but I made a mistake and I ended up crashing when I was reading the race. So that hurt me a little bit. But maybe when you feel so good on the bike, maybe your limit is 90%. So that's something I learned, and that's that was a mistake that I learned most from this year, I guess.
Your race bike, the FR250 GP, tell us about the strong points. Which parts, characteristics of the bike suit your style?
Well, the bike is amazing. I mean, the braking, especially for me, is a big step from last year. I made a big step compared to the other years. I improved so much on braking, especially also engine brake, but into the corners is almost everything in motorsports, because if you go in and if you can stop the bike well, to open a gas is not difficult. I mean, it is difficult, but it's not that difficult. The most important is how you go into the corner. So that is the main thing, and that's where I have the confidence the most.
You have some experience now in Moto3. Race fans and people new to MotoGP might watch Moto3 and think, this is absolutely mad what we're seeing here. From your perspective, somewhere like Mugello, when there's 4 or 5 of you going on the last 2 laps for the win, how difficult is it to remain calm and to make decisions and make a strategy? Because it seems like it's impossible from the outside.
Yes, it is always difficult to make strategy in Moto3. Every corner you have to make new strategy. One corner and then you make another strategy, because you never know when people are going to pass you. So it's difficult, but in the end, everybody have respect now, I believe. This year, especially the riders fighting in the front group, we all respect each other, and we give some spaces as well. So we trust also the people who you're racing with. So that maybe helps quite a lot.
Yeah, because Moto3 tends to recycle riders a lot, don't they? I mean, you have a rider like John, who was your teammate last year, who stays a long time. But then you have others who come in 1 or 2 years and then they move on. So I guess to always find safe riders you can race with and be confident with is difficult sometimes.
Yes, and also the rhythm, also the class start to change past 3 years. In the past had been always like 15 to 20 riders in a front group, maybe 4 years ago. And that was maybe more fun to watch. But past 3 years, the level of the championship start to go really high. And always the top guys makes a small difference to the rest of the group. So finally, even this year, the biggest group we had was maybe 6 top riders. Even Mugello is one of the track that you can have 20 riders in front group. But in the end, we had only 5 guys in front group. So past 3 years, it's making to a new championship. I mean, it start to have a small groups also. So, which is good. I mean, this is safer as well, and it's easier to beat race.
Just 2 more questions for you. The team structure and organization changed a little bit from last year. The bike stayed the same, the color, but everything else changed a little bit. How has that been for you? Has it been very smooth, having people like Peter at all, staying in place and that working relationship? Has it been okay?
Yes, I have all the teams. My side is all same compared to last year. And yes, again, Peter is for me is a perfect boss. He don't put any pressure. He always supporting our riders. I believe he was a rider as well, so he know what rider feels. He know what rider need as well. So I can't complain about my boss. He's amazing.
Lastly, Ayumu, how do you see your career now? Because people look at Taka in MotoGP, they talk about making the progress from Moto2 to MotoGP. How do you see your steps? Do you think you're reaching a peak now in Moto3 and it's time for the next step soon?
Yes, I was thinking about going to Moto2 even last year. I mean, going to this year as I had maybe some opportunity as well. But I decided to stay to fight for championship, which I hope I will do this year. And this year, I think in every track we had been quick. We finished top 3 in qualifying in all the races until now. And I believe, I think it's time to move up. I also feel that I can do well in Moto2. So I think it's time. Also, it was good that Husqvarna started Moto2 team as well, going to this year. So that's a great structure, and hopefully I can jump on that bike next year.
Ayumu, thanks ever so much for your time. So much. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Good to hear there from Ayumu Sasaki. Importantly, also just to hear from riders, I think in Moto2 and Moto3 generally. We don't usually speak to these guys, on a one-to-one basis.
Speak for yourself, mate.
Struggling to see it anywhere, Neil. Get some audio in this podcast. But let's go on to our winners and losers from Germany because Assen is hard upon. So we'll be moving straight on to round 8 in a matter of hours and days. For me, I'm going to pick Pecco Bagnaia. Like I said in the note show, Dave, I just want to thank Pecco for making that a real contest. He easily could have throttled off and thought, I'm not going to catch Martin. I'm just going to take the points, take the championship lead. He talked about improving the rear stability on the Desmos Adichie. He found handling improvement. The team's working well. Gabarini's working his magic for him. I thought it was a fantastic performance. So, and Bagnaia bounded back. He said, actually, pre-event that Sachsenring 2022 was like a little bit of a low point mentally, or it was the point where he reorientated his goals for the year, and then we know what happened afterwards. So a much improved performance Bagnaia, who's my winner. Neil?
I'm going to go with Jack Miller. I thought it was just a solid weekend. Best KTM. He beat Brad Binder in the sprint. He was losing to Binder in the main race, but then Brad obviously had that big crash, which was a shame for him. But yeah, the only non-Ducati rider inside the top 9. And just like another pretty solid weekend. Like nothing majorly spectacular, but front row start, third in the sprint, and steady pace in the feature race. I mean, he had that huge moment coming down into turn 11 on the first lap, which saw him engulfed by the 3 Ducatis. I think it was Martin, Bagnaia and Marini all swarmed over him.
Underwear changing moment, I think he said.
I think he did use he did say that, or indicate that he had soiled his underpants. But apart from that, it was a steady ride, and Miller just doing an exceptional job this year with the KTM.
It's always funny that riders have lucky underpants and then proceed to soil them whenever they're past their places. For me, my winner has to be Gigi Dall'Igna. 8 Ducatis in the top 9.
First time in history they've finished in the top 5.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the first time in history that they
top 5 out.
Yeah, exactly. The last
a week after, first time in history they had occupied the top 4.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at some point we're going to have a top 8. If both KTMs, because the only people who are keeping Ducati honest are KTM. KTM are doing a fantastic job of actually taking the fights to Ducati. But Gigi Dall'Igna was hired to win a championship for Ducati. He's done that. The way he is running the organisation, using all of the resources at his disposal, using the 8 bikes on the grid, the fact that the GP22 and GP23 are similar enough that they're providing useful feedback from their riders. no, hats off. This was the weekend that really justified. I mean, apart from last year, this was the weekend that really justified his hiring.
And where there are winners, there are miserable wretches. So, Neil, who was your candidate for the fall guy of Germany?
I wouldn't call him a miserable wretch, Adam. I think that's a little bit harsh, especially because we just had him on our show. But my loser, I guess, would be Ayumu Sasaki. He did finish second, but he was the pole sitter by over a second in Moto 3.
New lap record.
Obliterated the new lap record, or the existing lap record by 0.7 of a second. I think after 6 laps, he was over or close to a second and a half ahead of the rest. You just thought, okay, Ayumu's going to piss off and comfortably win. But Dennis Andre, much to his credit, rallied, caught him up, and then mugged him really in the last corner. And I think that one's going to be pretty hard to take for Ayumu, just because he was so dominant, had such a clear step on the rest, and still didn't quite manage to get the job done. He's clearly, I think he is the fastest guy in Moto 3 this year, but just I think a few of the crashes earlier in the year in Argentina and Austin were playing on his mind for a couple of races. He wasn't willing to take the risk. In France, now it's becoming a bit of a thing. It's like now it seems like a bit of a weight on his shoulders that I haven't won a race this year. Yeah,
but I mean, you sort of get the feeling that when he does, then that's going to be pretty much it. Do you know what I mean? Then there's going to be lots coming. It's one of that. It's just waiting for the dam to burst.
Who's your loser?
My loser, my loser, we've discussed it at length. There's no point in nothing more I can add, is HRC. This was the most miserable weekend in their history, and this year they've had a lot of really miserable weekends, and there's no sign of any improvement.
Hey, but they scored a point with Taka Nakagami.
Aha! Congratulations, Taka Nakagami, on scoring a point, on being the third fastest Japanese motorcycle in MotoGP on Sunday.
We haven't even touched Yamaha, to be honest, guys.
It's a separate podcast, though.
Yeah, it is a separate podcast. Fabio Quartararo using the 2021 setup, just throwing on a soft rear tyre because, well, what else could he do?
That again tells you all you need to know about where Yamaha are. They're doing desperate things like throwing soft tyres at it.
And like we were saying with Marc Marquez and Sachsenring, I think we'll have to address the Yamaha issue when it comes to Assen. Usually a place where Fabio Quartararo is, a different level. So maybe one for the podcast next week. My loser was, I'm going to say Brad Binder. Not in performance terms, but I think that crash, basically just when he lost grip on the left foot peg, went wide, just didn't have enough room to pick up the bike before he hit the gravel. Is a bit of a blow to his championship hopes. I know you made the point at the top of the show, Dave, that there's like 1 million points left to win this year, so still plenty of time for the South African to get back into it. But I think that was a bit of a blow because he could have been easily on for a podium there. Depending if Zarco maybe could have reeled him in. That was
and also it was a really big crash from such a tiny little incident sort of thing. That's just terrible luck.
Yeah, and I would also give a little nod towards Maverick Vinales because I think, like Neil, you told me yesterday, I wasn't even aware that he didn't appear for one media debrief throughout the weekend.
I don't think he did, did he?
No, he at some point he turned up in the media centre for one of them, stood around, but then they turned up 5 riders, and we can only speak to 2 at the same time. Because it's one in their native language and one in English. Stood around for about 5 minutes and then walked away.
I guess
it's fair enough because it was just utter chaos, but it always is utter chaos.
I guess he didn't have much to say. I mean, it was terrible, and then blowing the engine and pulling out. I mean, again, it seems like Maverick and Aprilia that harmony is not singing quite on full tune at the moment.
The honeymoon is over.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to Assen next, guys. Home GP for you, Dave, and we have a fantastic podcast somewhere. I think even might be on YouTube, where you go through the pronunciation of how the corners or how they should be said.
Yeah, I shall have to retweet that at some point.
Yes, I know Neil's embraced it fully for his commentary duties. In fact,
he's just going to play my pronunciation of every corner every time. He's going to do it on a sound loop.
You've got to fill the air in Model 2 FP2, mate.
Assen, it's. Guys, this is 3 races back-to-back. It's very draining, but, 3 amazing circuits and venues, 3 different types of crowds. We're expecting, again, more people in the Netherlands. It's it's a staple event on the calendar day.
Yeah, I mean, like they are. I don't think it's quite sold out yet, but it's not far off being sold out. All the grandstands are sold out. The atmosphere is always fantastic. It's a special race. It's a special racetrack as well. I mean, apart from the sort of like having lost the North Loop, the southern part of that track is just fantastic. It's normally a Yamaha track, but as we know, there are no Yamaha tracks anymore. They're just rubbish everywhere. God knows how many Hondas will actually turn up on the grid. I expect it to be quite a low number. Steffel Bradl will be in for Alex Rins. We know that, but who knows? He might be the only Honda there. And it looks like it's going to be Ducati versus KTM again.
Well, having talked about Maverick Vinales, this is also a great track for him now. Maybe he could reverse things there. Marco Bezzecchi was his first podium last year. Maybe he, can turn things around a little bit. And Alessio Spargaro, of course, was fantastically fast. So fingers crossed that Aprilia can join the fray.
Yeah, but then we said that at Mugello, it should have been an Aprilia track because it's quite a sweet handling machine. We said that at Sachsenring, Alessio Spargaro was on the podium there last year. And yes, he was the standout guy in last year's Dutch TT. But as he said on Sunday, yesterday, Aprilia have improved 3% this year, whereas Ducati have made big strides. KTM have made big strides this year. So I don't think it's going to be enough. So yeah, I think it's going to be Bagnaia, Bezzecchi, Martin, the kind of the similar figures. Maybe Zarco up there as well, and maybe Jack Miller and Brad Binder, but I'm not saying that with absolute certainty.
Maybe there is a pattern emerging here. I mean, all three podiums yesterday in all three classes were the same riders that we saw in Mugello. There was no, apart from the change in the order, of course. But Alessio Spargaro also complaining a little bit about the starting device on the Aprilia, saying that's also another factor where they haven't progressed and the others have.
Yeah, and they've been playing around with clutches all year, literally all year. Every time there's a test, when there's an Aprilia leaving the pits because they do a test start. It's amazing. Also, like if you go down into the pits, you will see like clutches lying around. They are really struggling with the start, something which KTM have absolutely nailed down. Just amazing. The KTM start are amazing, so much so that teams are starting to whisper rumours about them having something illegal. This always happens whenever one bike gets good at one thing, then obviously they must be cheating. No, I can't see anything that they'll be doing illegal other than that. They're both. I mean, Brad Binder has always been a really good at starting. Jack Miller's been a good starting, and they've just got everything perfect to get off the line. That is where Aprilia is missing.
So TT Circuit Assen next. Remember, folks, it is not a religious institution.
The Cathedral of Speed.
I couldn't even get it out. Anyway,
we weren't going to let you get that miss that one, mate.
Yeah, I'm missing the race, so I just had to look at that ridiculous poster.
Don't worry, we'll send you a picture.
Yeah, I'm sure you shall. Thank you very much. Cheers for listening, guys. Thank you also so much to Renthal. Go and check out renthal.com, as I said at the top of the show, and to Husqvarna Motorcycles. We hope you enjoyed the interviews with both Darren Binder and Ayumu Sasaki in the last two shows. We'll be back right after the latest Grand Prix in the Netherlands and headed into the summer break.